open that door that it depends on how we interpret things. It depends on how we explain things. And that can get us into a very different mood and emotional state than what somebody else would do. Different people view the same event in many different ways. And this is something that we can actually actively do. And this is what we do as coaches by offering reframes. You know, it's like, well, that seems to me like you seem to see it very negatively. I see it quite positively. And that's just me as a coach, my perspective of it. And our client might have a very different perspective of it. Just by offering that other perspective, they see there's other ways of looking at this. And that gets people in a position where they're able to choose. You know, they're able to choose how to look at their lives.
And I think that's particularly important vis-a-vis looking at the past, because we can't change the past, but we can change the way we look at the past.
Exactly.
Thereby enabling us to move on more easily and take the good stuff out of it.
Exactly.
Or at least just to get that sort of route open.
And we talked about people in prison. You know, they have very little influence about how their daily routine is going to look like, but they have all the influence in how they deal with it, their attitude towards it, what they actually think. Because nobody can influence how they think yet.
I suppose that's what Nelson Mandela was about.
Exactly, yeah. And he could have done so many other things. He chose to stand up for what he believes in, and he got sent to prison. And he was there for a very long time. You know? But he had a very, very strong meaning for that action. So he accepted the consequences to what he does, and had a huge impact on the rest of humanity, really.
So this question might not be a short answer, for sure. But
We might have to park it, because we only have 25 minutes before we do the Q&A.
Actually, but it's just a quick question to have a think about it.
Sure.
About prisons. I mean, I work in prisons as well with young people, and it's something that's a very interesting point, how to help them, you know, between the ages of 18 and 24 to understand that actually what's happening to them, it's okay and it's their choice to think in a more positive way, when actually all they have around them is negativity. Yes. And so yes, it's very, I mean, it feels almost, it's not impossible, of course, and that's what we try to do, but that's kind of a question that I...
Absolutely, and I think we should teach that in every school, not just in prison. But like from a very early age, we can teach there are different ways of looking at the world, and you actually have a lot more choice than you think. But there's a lot of systems where we don't want people to think for themselves, because it's a lot easier if they just do what you say. And every parent will know that. You know, there's the spectrum of like, oh, I want them to think for themselves and challenge everything, but at the same time it's so annoying when they challenge everything. And that's beautiful, you know, that's one of these spectrums. Exactly. Okay, so we need interventions. Coaching is an intervention. This is probably an intervention that doesn't work that well. Life stinks. You should have a more positive attitude. Life stinks. Is that going to work for very long? I don't think Garfield believes in this very much. That's why we found that coaching is a really natural partner to use for positive psychology. It seems to be a natural way to apply positive psychology. Using coaching skills, either in one-to-one as in a structured coaching session, or even in a coaching approach to group work. You know, we can use our coaching skills in so many different circumstances. If it's the way we communicate, the way we listen to people, the way we relate, you know, we can actually apply a lot of positive change through coaching. And a lot of research into coaching comes from the field of positive psychology, because we're looking to improve areas, so many areas of positive life. When we're not looking at fixing problems, but we're working with goals, then positive psychology is really the field that the science is looking into, that we can use as coaches. So a lot of very interesting studies looking into what does coaching actually affect, and what's an effective way of doing this. These are just a couple of quotes to show there. We don't really need to get into it. I'm happy to supply these again. There's a lot of extra reading in there for those of you who are interested to go a little bit further. So how do we live a good life? Some existential solutions are that we are constantly engaging with it. Existentialists don't believe that we can figure things out, find the truth, find the way of living life, and then just stay happy and live happily ever after. That doesn't quite work, because we cannot just reach an authentic mode of being and then stay there. It takes constant work, constant awareness, constant reflection. And we know that when we're in a room with a client, we constantly need to be aware of our assumptions. Oh, what does he mean by that word? What do I think he means by that word? What do I mean by that word? You know, and it can be very complex. You know, when somebody, how are you? I'm good. That means nothing. You know, well, so, oh, what's good? But even the question, how are you, forces our client to put themselves into a category of good or bad or anxious, and anything they say, we don't really know what it means. We have an assumption of what it means, and we have a lot of shared assumptions and shared understandings. We have whole books that explain what certain words mean, with other words that nobody really knows what they mean. So we need to constantly be aware of our assumptions, how we deal with the world, and what other people mean by it. I mentioned the courage to be. You know, every day we take risks. Every decision we make excludes other opportunities, other possibilities. I choose this romantic partner, I cannot have all of the other ones. I choose this job, I cannot take the other job. You know, I choose to be here right now, so I cannot be in a different place. So that can be scary. And that's why a lot of people have trouble making decisions. A lot of our clients will have trouble making decisions. Because every decision excludes other options. So we need to take risks every day, every decision we make, even the socks we put on. Because we might have funky socks on, we chose the black ones, but if we had the funky ones on, at night we might get in touch with a person who changes our lives, and they say, oh, funky socks. That might change our lives. Putting those socks on in the morning could literally change our whole lives. But we don't know that. Maybe we don't get the most amazing job of our lifetime because the guy is like, funky socks? I don't think so. They're not a good fit for me. Who knows? Funky socks? No funky socks. Next time in the morning, think about what socks you put on. Change that. So there's no certainty. We need to take that leap of faith. You know, we need to take risks. We don't have to take risks. We can choose not to take risks. But I believe we live less fully. A less full life. Full as in the whole experience of all the emotions. And this is what we've kind of been hinting on all along. Every emotion is valuable. Every emotion shows you something that is important to you. Oh, why did I get so angry in this situation? You know, somebody else might have not been touched at all. You know, somebody steals our laptop. Somebody might say, oh, well, it was time for a new one anyway. Or, you know, maybe I had to rewrite that book because actually it wasn't so good. For other people, the whole world collapses. You know, and again, touching on some of your conversations, I'm sure, some of the bad things that have happened to us actually turned out to be a positive thing in the broader context. So we need to engage with life. We need to, I say we need to because this is my personal perspective. But like, if we embrace the negative, we can float atop. We can actually feel good about feeling uncomfortable. Because every emotion is valuable. If we get very happy or very sad about something, there's something that is connected to, an interpretation of ours, or something that is really important to us. We lose a job and we get incredibly sad and upset. Well, we obviously were very connected to something that this job is connected to. You know? If we get incredibly emotional, there's something that it touches on that is very important to us, and that is very good to know. And that in itself values or makes this uncomfortable emotion very valuable, because it teaches us something about what's important to us, our values, how we see the world. And the more we know about how we relate to the world and what's important to us and what we really care for, the more we can make decisions based on that. So now when I'm having a really crappy day and I feel really bad, I'm like, yeah, well, this is the spectrum of life. You know, if I would never feel sad, then normal would become the new sad, and I would have to be very happy to be happy. You know, because we adapt. That's one of the biggest strengths that we have as people. We adapt to good and to bad circumstances. You know, we lose our job and we lose our house and we end up as a homeless person in Calcutta, and we adapt to it. And we still have that sense of community perhaps, or still have these senses of other things that can make us happy, still in these circumstances. But like every emotion is valuable to a certain level. In the clinical area, yes, there is clinical anxiety that we can do something about it. Like some emotions are perhaps way too intense that it really affects our lives in many different ways. And then we can go back and look at, okay, that is really valuable. We can learn about something about us through looking at why that emotion was so intense. And the more we know about us, the more we can make conscious, informed decisions. And the more we value negative emotions, the more we can actually be content and appreciating every moment in life, because that's a conclusion I arrive at again and again and again. Every moment is precious. And if we suffer, that's a precious moment. It might not feel good, but it's a precious moment, because it teaches us the whole spectrum of life. It teaches us to be appreciative of when we feel good, because we know what feeling bad is like. And it really gets us to know ourselves. So, positive psychology says we should build on the positives of strengths, learn to be more optimistic. A lot of research in positive psychology is about resilience, to bounce back from bad things. And we bounce back a lot quicker if we appreciate the whole spectrum of emotions. And anything that happens, whether people regard it as good or as bad, or anywhere in between. You know, if we value that, we can build on it, and we can float atop. Think of life as a big storm, or like as an ocean. You know, sometimes it's really rough, sometimes there's almost no waves. Think about somebody who surfs that. We can actually use that buoyancy to float ourselves along. We don't need to get to the bottom of the ocean and die. We can actually, you know, we can actually float atop and use the energy of life as something positive. There's always an interplay of positives and negatives. And I keep talking about it, and you're very much present in my mind there, because positive and negative, again, it's a matter of how we judge it. But something that feels uncomfortable and sometimes something that feels good, see how they relate, and your life will make more sense.
The words that I find useful is to use discernment, not judgment. So when I discern the feeling, it has characteristics, but I don't have to put it into the good or bad box.
Yeah, I like that. I borrowed that from Amy van Dertsen as well, because I really liked it. She says, there can only be energy between a positive and a negative pole. So, if you remember that from physics, how lightning is created, there needs to be positive and negative energy. So these change, and then energy gets created. And this is what life is about. We cannot have very high energy if we're always happy or always sad. We need the whole spectrum to live that kind of life that's full.
So what you're saying now in the last slide, that really resonates with me, but it seemed to me it conflicts with this pursuit of happiness. Because the whole pursuit of happiness is focused on feeling good and flourishing, yay, you know, on the top of the world 100% of the time, all the time, every day, and then you feel, of course the flip side is that you feel like you're a failure.
Yeah, remember those two bits of happiness? I think most people are looking for hedonism. They're looking to feel good all the time. The other part of happiness, which is like full of meaning, eudaimonia, you know, this is for me the happiness I prefer. And most of the clients that come to me based on positive psychology, existentialism, I explore that with them. That is usually my first conversation. What do you actually want? You know, how do you want to feel? What kind of life do you want to lead? And if they want to live a life of hedonism, yes, we can work together. But if they want to live a full life, full of the whole spectrum, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean they feel good all the time. And for me, that's energy. That's the energy of life. And that's really beautiful. That's the kind of client I really like to work with. Because there's a good balance. You know, there's positive stuff, there's negative stuff. Depends on how you look at it. but like they want to live life. That's the most important thing. And life comes with all of this.
So these people do get to that point in their lives a lot of times when they find that the hedonistic stuff is not meaningful, and therefore they seek meaning. So like the monk who sold his Ferrari scenario, and then they seek the other part, the spiritual self-actualization and the more giving back part. Which I guess happens to different stages.
Yeah, exactly. Look at what kind of these pillars of happiness are present in your life, and look at how much do they influence your life. What kind of life do you want to live? Have you experienced suffering? To what degree? Have you experienced love, and to what degree? You know, what do you want in your life? And if you're open to all the spectrum of life, then you can appreciate every moment rather than seeking a particular part of it. Because it's inevitable to go through most of the spectrum in your lifetime.
Do you think that people come with a hedonistic goal that actually they discover?
I think I couldn't generalize that. I think a lot of people in the West have that, and that has complex reasons. I'm happy to discuss that afterwards. Yes?
I was thinking, when we were discussing, like we were talking about when people start thinking, when people get into these discussions about existentialism and positive psychology and all this, and we were saying this is kind of a privilege to get into these discussions because the first thing is you need to chase the beast and then hunt and feed yourself. So you have to have in the pyramid, you have to have those things fulfilled first to get into these discussions, and then you get to think about the top, right? But then,
to a certain extent, because I do think even when you're at the bottom and you're hunting for food, there will be a moment when you don't have to do anything. I think it's very rare that somebody has not a minute even where they're not hunting for food or shelter.
Yeah, but this is what I was coming to. Like, to me, there is a point where it's always in the back of the mind of people, even if they're not. I don't think it is a privilege, because there was a study that they published, I don't know which European newspaper, they published about the happiest country in the world.
And
it was actually a third world country, which is where I'm born. And at the time they published it, I was the personal assistant of the vice president of Goldman Sachs. And he said to me, how is all these poor people so happy?
It's difficult to understand from that.
He's like, if you guys come to be the delivery people that ride bicycles and are illegal and underwaged.
Yeah.
And I never had an answer for him. I wish I had one. And I think until now it's coming to my mind that these people is not thinking about, they're thinking about companionships and all these concepts, but they're actually chasing the beast.
Yeah, and a lot of these
concepts
guys
are not because you have privilege, they're always running at the back of your head.
Yeah, I agree, and a lot of these guys who ride the bicycles, they might ask similar questions, and they say, oh, all these Goldman Sachs executives, how are they, where they seem so miserable and hectic all the time, although they have so much money, why don't they take more holiday? It depends on your worldview, it depends on how you choose to live, and what's important to you. If somebody has very strong values in making money, then a job in Goldman Sachs will make them very happy. If you have strong other values that a job at Goldman Sachs perhaps is not so compatible with, you're spending as much time as possible with your family, for example, then a job at Goldman Sachs would not do that for you.
But it also seems that the life has to be...
Sorry. I think generally, I don't like the association that you think that the Western world is happier. It's not like that. Just because a country is poor or is not that modern doesn't mean that they're not happy. Even I've been to people's houses in India as well, where they don't have electricity, not running water, they have the wells and all. But if you see the old people, they're sitting there in the sunshine and the kids are playing in the garden, and when you look in their eyes, you can see true happiness.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't see in the eyes, in a lot of people's eyes.
And that's a question of culture, and again, of worldview, about how people choose their lives. I got in touch a lot with Mexican culture lately, and the family structures there are so strong. And if I compare that, you mentioned old people, for example. If I compare old people in Mexico to old people in Britain, for example, it seems to be a very different life.
Because
I can't make a judgment call whether they're happier or not, but there's certainly different values.
I think it's more to do with that we're so modern that we are not in touch with nature, not in touch with our simple, families are becoming smaller and smaller.
Although,
And
could I stop you there? Could you park that for a bit later? Because we have 5 minutes and I just want to wrap up. Because it's a slightly different discussion. I would really like to get into it.
No, it's just simply, I just want to wrap up myself.
Okay.
I just think life is not that complicated as we make it out here. Just that's what I want to say. It's much more easier if we would take it easier.
Maybe you should write that book.
So I have a question about the positive and the negative.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, in your work, do you come across, because there's something about people resisting change, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of
But
avoidance.
there's something about people resisting extremes. Like really, that thing about you saying living a full life, and just actually being comfortable in the neutral, and not wanting to go to extreme happiness or extreme sadness.
Again, I don't think we can generalize that, because I know some people who throw themselves out there to all the extremes. They go from extreme to extreme, and I'm sure all of you know somebody like that. They just came back from the Congo to document a war or something, and then they go completely change careers, and then they start something completely different.
No, I wasn't generalizing. I was saying in those particular instances, how as a coach, how do you deal with it? Because that was a curiosity of mine.
When somebody is avoiding the extremes.
Yeah.
Well, it's up to them. I'll try to reflect back how they see the world and what's important to them, how they want to live their lives, and then reflect that back to them. So they get in touch with who they are, what their values are, what their worldview is, and then make choices based on that foundation. Build a strong foundation from which you can decide what you want your life to be like. So if somebody wants to explore all the extremes, go for it. If somebody wants to stay neutral, go for it, but make an informed decision about it.
Yeah, okay.
And I need to be very careful not to project my worldview on other people. And as a coach, that's extremely important for all of them. We're not making people or building people in our image because we figured out how to live a happy life. Everybody has to figure that out for themselves. And what I can notice is avoidance of existential struggle, for example. Avoidance of anxiety. Not opening your eyes to certain realities that are out there, or certain truths, or certain facts. Because we look away a lot, all of us, including me. I choose to not see a lot of things. And I try to be aware of as much as possible, but I don't necessarily want to know everything that's going on in a certain area of the world, because, it would just make me really, really sad and angry. And some things I choose not to look at. Some articles I choose not to read. Some movies I choose not to watch. And sometimes we choose not to talk to certain people. We avoid difficult conversations, conflict. Because it's difficult to put conflict on the table and talk about it. It's uncomfortable. But in the end, it might work out better if we do. But just to wrap up, there's a process that I use, and this process is kind of juggled up. It's not a linear process. It depends on what's coming up. But what I always do is I explore what the worldview of a person is, what their values are, what's important to them, the kind of underlying stuff, and explore that. And some of these positive psychology tools can help us. Figure out somebody's resources. We can give them assessments, inventories, psychometric tests, questionnaires. And I'm trying to figure out what their main kind of conflict and dilemma is on an existential basis. Are they having most trouble relating to people, or are there big questions of meaning? What's their main big question? Well, what's the biggest questions that they have? And then get a sense of that. What do they actually want? Figure out where they're heading, what kind of direction they are. What do they choose? What kind of choices do they have? What possibilities do they have? And a lot of coaching is really about that. We're trying to open doors that people can choose to go through or not. But what's important is that they don't feel they have no choice, that they develop options and then choose. Find the obstacles and help people find ways to deal with them. And then in the end, they're going to achieve some kind of goal. That's the essence of coaching. And there's the positive psychology aspect of it is really fun to work with. Because if you start from a position of, imagine yourself being happy, or what is happiness for you, or what is a good life. Not necessarily feeling good all the time. But there's a lot of stuff we can do, a lot of interventions we can give them. It's fun to talk about it. It gets people in a positive, creative mood. If you don't start with, okay, what's your problem you want to get rid of? But it's like, what is it you actually want? What's a good life for you? What are you trying to understand? And if you just give people that space and reflect back how they see the world and what you hear, this is what we're trying to read between the lines. We can ask direct questions, but often I hear it. When people start talking, when anybody starts talking, we're going to do that for the last couple of minutes here, is you hear what people are concerned about. When you pick up on an emotion, you can start digging into that. Oh, you got emotional there, what's going on? Try to connect that. And then, this is a model of existential coaching which I quite like, because it gets you through this first contact, and it highlights how important it is to highlight responsibilities of the coach, of the client, and how do they deal with these kind of choices. The main tool in my coaching approach is we explore. I help my client explore what things are connected to when they talk. So you say, tell me about it, and they tell you a lot of things, and you can hear a lot of things, you can reflect that back. And then people create an awareness of what's important to them, what their worldview is. Then you can tune out, you can offer your own perspective on things. And in the end, clients are able to move because they realize who they are, what's important to them, and then they explore options and possibilities so they can choose how they want their life to be like. So it is about existential intelligence, if you could call it like that. It means embracing all the contradictions, all the dilemmas, all the negative stuff, and living life with courage. Taking this leap of faith, taking risks, exploring uncertainty, accepting this, not just accepting it, embracing it as something positive. Because this gives us freedom to choose our lives. We make the rules. Only us, every one of you makes their own rules, or chooses to accept other people's rules. There's a great freedom in that. We can do so many things. It's about realizing that there is no such thing as a perfect human being. We all choose who we want to be. We all have our flaws. And once we accept that, we can work with it. We don't feel that constant lack of not being perfect. But we can choose to live the life we want to live. So to be resilient, to be flexible enough that when things happen in life that shake our worldview, we're flexible enough to take these new information in, process them, and build a better, stronger, more flexible worldview. We try to understand the world. Facing existential challenges in a creative manner, in a personal manner, that takes into account the good things and the bad things, the pleasant things and the uncomfortable things, and view them all as part of a full life. And if we flip that switch, for me it was incredible, because every time I felt bad, I'm like, yeah, that's also part of life. It's like, oh wow, I was on the way here, and I got really nervous in the tube, and I'm like, ooh, this is excitement. When I used to hear anxiety, I always had this bad assumption. It's like, oh, it's something that should be avoided. But actually, anxiety is just excitement. But excitement is usually viewed as positive. I got really excited. So at that moment when I'm like, whoa, I'm like, actually, that's life. It feels really good. I feel really alive. It might not be comfortable as such, but I feel really alive, and that's a good thing. I value that. And I had that with clients as well. They're like, I've been trying to avoid this, but actually, there's good value in this, in feeling like this. Because I wouldn't feel really good tomorrow, or really good afterwards, or whatever your meaning-making process is for that. And then you have positive psychology, so you're adding a scientific understanding to the philosophical framework, knowing what influences happiness and what doesn't for most people. You cannot ever know that for a specific individual, but you can know tendencies. You know, you can throw certain inspiring books out there, interesting theories about what it actually means to be happy. Oh, I want to be happy. Instead of saying, okay, you say, oh, well, what does that mean? What kind of happiness is it? When they say, you have a language to talk about it. So you can work with what our resources are. You are actually able to offer some quick fixes where they are appropriate. If you really can't be in a sad mood for the rest of today, then there's things you can do to get yourself into a good mood for the rest of today, or for at least a few hours. Our imagination can do that. And if we need to be cheerful, for example, to do a good job in that project that's coming up or an event tonight, then you can actually get yourself into a positive mood, if you choose to. Doesn't mean that you haven't dealt with any of the underlying stuff that made you feel negative in the first place, but we have these quick fixes. So we're creating a positive atmosphere. It's fun to coach in that way, because people work through a better life. So that's quite a good starting point, I found. It gets people in a really creative mood. And a lot of it is about resilience. When bad things happen, we deal with it in a positive way. So we bounce back quicker. So in the end, existence, agency, happiness seem to be most important to most people. They influence our life quite profoundly. Life is a challenge, constant ups and downs. Anxiety is inevitable. So existentialism is a philosophy of human experience, of lived experience, that can help our clients and people in general, or to come to terms with some of this bad stuff that's going on, some of these anxiety, some of this inner conflict, some of the dark side. And instead of trying to avoid it, they could recognize that there's a lot of positive stuff in there, there's a lot of freedom in there, a lot of full life, a lot of experiences that you'll cherish. Positive psychology is a science of well-being and human functioning. And coaching is a really good tool to apply positive psychology to facilitate personal development, to create understanding about our clients' lives and what that is about, how they view the world. So if you put that all together, we have an approach to personal development that works along the whole spectrum of what people go through. Feeling very good, feeling very bad, uncomfortable, the whole spectrum. And then you start embracing what life is about. And you start embracing even the uncomfortable sides of it. And once you do that, something shifts. Because next time you feel very uncomfortable, maybe you don't try to avoid it. And you sit in it for a while. And then you make a choice what you want to do with it. Is this really worth suffering for? Can I make this go away? Am I missing out on anything? In the end, it's up to you how we choose to live our lives. So I found that it's existential philosophy. Everybody has to make up their own understanding of existential philosophy. And that provides really fertile ground for integrating a whole variety of coaching approaches, a whole variety of how you view the world, of tools, of interventions. You know, you can integrate a bit of a CBT tool or something from humanistic practice. You can get some NLP techniques involved and create some rapport. You know, it's so open for all of you to be who you are and still get some of this in to benefit your clients. So existential buoyancy really means, for me, getting to know yourself, accepting the so-called negatives as something valuable and meaningful, a good teacher. And once realized, it will help you float atop life's big wave and you can surf. You know, sometimes you have a wipe out, you need to pedal back out. But actually, without the pedaling back out, you wouldn't have a great ride. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you end up at the beach, you can take a break. Sometimes there's another wave and it pulls you right under and you're underwater for minutes on end. But to have that buoyancy, to have that movement to the top, feeling good about, even uncomfortable things. That's what existential buoyancy is about for me. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Yannick. I was at the side there thinking about how would I sort of bring this evening to a close and what I might say, and I sort of went, well, actually, it's not about what I think, it's about what you think. And I think one of the things that I've taken from this evening is that there are so many different strands and so many different things that are awoken, that word, in us when we start to think about these existential themes, and they trigger different things within us and different ideas and different thoughts. And I really love the bits you were saying there about this whole acceptance of who we are, but also accepting that whole range of emotion that exists and not trying to push something away, but accepting it and sitting within it and seeing how that feels for us and what's that about for us. So I really enjoyed that, and it's, you know, my mind is a weird place, and I really like the bit about the socks, about how the socks can create a different experience for you in a different time. It's just that really interesting how these different experiences can show up within our lives.
When the socks came up for the first time, I never used that example before.
And I think also one of the things that really rang true for me this evening is that we're just kind of scratching the surface with this stuff in this conversation. And I think if you want to go deeper in this conversation, Yannick runs the existential CPDs that we have at Animas, and if you want to go further with him, I think it might be something to jump onto, to explore. But also, we're heading up to the bar. So, if you want to explore further with him, there's something that you can... there's something more that you can delve into with that over a few glasses of wine. But before we head off to the bar, I just want to check in if there are any... We've got sort of maybe 10 minutes to field some questions with Yannick. If there's anything that you're burning to explore with him right now.
Yes, please.
Happy-go-lucky. Is this what you believe in? Is this
No.
what you? Is this?
Well, tell me about it.
How do you distinguish the difference between? Oh, so I had that in my family, but that's a good positive. I mean, that's a good emotion I have to embrace. And do I need to justify what positive is going to come out of it? Like, how do you apply it on a daily basis?
Mm-hmm. So happy-go-lucky, as I understand it, to me it sounds quite blind. You know, like I choose everything as positive, and I don't really look at the risks.
Yeah.
And that's not something I would advocate here. It's like, oh, I feel uncomfortable because I just put my bag in the corner of a nightclub or something, and it might get stolen. And the happy-go-lucky person would be like, it's gonna be all right. You know, and if you have existential buoyancy, you're like, oh, I tune into that discomfort and learn from it. What is that about? Okay, I think it's about my bag, and that's related to an experience when my bag got stolen back in Ethiopia. And then you can make an informed decision whether right now there's a risk that I'm worth taking, that I choose to take or not. And then at that point, you can make a decision whether I put my bag there and I take the risk because the context of this nightclub feels very safe and there's lots of my friends around, so it's probably alright. Or you tune into and you say, oh, actually, that was a good negative emotion because I feel uncomfortable, and now I'm actually put my bag somewhere and put it to the lockup and just choose to spend the £2 for the wardrobe.
And one of the things that's really key then, what Yannick was saying for me, is this idea of making a choice to tune in and to see what's going on when you tune in. So what's that emotion about? Or what's that memory about? So you can actually make a choice from that as opposed to just discarding it.
Yes.
With clients, are you quite, do you explain what you're doing and the purpose behind it, or do you just sort of ask the questions and just kind of go there?
No, I'm super transparent.
Yeah,
So I always in the beginning explain what I'm kind of about. Usually they have a look at my website or something, so they have a sense of what kind of philosophy I'm doing. I tell them things that I challenge a lot of things. And roughly kind of the process about what I'm doing in terms of reflecting back what they tell me, so they can build that kind of strong foundation from which they can make choices. So I very, like, sometimes I even say, oh, the reason I'm asking this question is because,
Yeah.
you know, and I ask a question, maybe that I pick up on something that they do with their body, or like they don't quite understand, or they seem a bit hesitant of giving me an answer, and then I might follow it up. Oh, you know, transparency is really important for me.
I suppose I was asking because that feels natural, the natural thing to do. But then it also feels sometimes like you then say, okay, you know, I guess it then sort of feels a bit technical, you know, like I'm taking them on this technical journey, whereas actually I should just it should flow a bit more naturally. I guess maybe with time.
And I got quite good at translating technical stuff into language that people can actually relate to.
Yeah.
Because if you read more existential philosophy, you'll know what I mean. A lot of that stuff is really, really tough to read. And then it's about knowing your client enough so you know what kind of language to use with them.
And when it's appropriate as well, because not every time would be appropriate to be transparent and explain what sits behind your questioning.
Yeah.
And some clients don't care, they just care about the outcome. 1, 2.
In the case of people who appear to be quite emotionless, so they don't seem to experience emotions or feel anything, is that a case that they just simply are emotionless and don't really feel things, or do you think that they are there and they're just not able to tune into them?
I truly believe that everybody feels. Everybody has emotions, and a lot of people have learned to suppress a lot of these emotions because they were devalued in the environment they grew up in.
So in that scenario, because that actually resonates a lot with the person that I'm thinking about, what's the best sort of thing? Would it be coaching, do you think, or do you think more of a therapy kind of thing? Or
well, that's the thing. For me, there's a huge grey area. I don't know this person at all. Depends what they need to deal with, depends what's behind that. I would start with reflecting back what you experience. Oh, you seem to express very little emotions, or you seem to you haven't talked about any emotional states in the time we've been working together. And just be curious about that. And then they will tell you, or they won't. But they choose to talk about certain things, and you can pick up on what they tell you, and more importantly, you can pick up on what they're not telling you. It's like, oh, you told me about all these things, I've never heard you talk about your wife. Or other people in general. You know, some people talk a lot about their spiritual beliefs, but they never tell you about having done any exercise or their relationship to their body. So what are you not telling me? It's a really powerful question. Yes?
Thank you so much for that really, really fascinating lecture, and I would love to explore the CPs and it sounds so fascinating. I'm actually just curious because I've only dabbled unfocused in this area in positive psychology and existentialism, and I wonder, that is what people talk about at the moment. I wonder what the next phase of that is, and if there is that emerging as well. I'm just curious as to.
Well, one of a really interesting development is what's happening in positive psychology at the moment. There's a movement that we call second wave positive psychology, or positive psychology 2.0. I thought 2.0 was 10 years ago, but...
Industrialism 4.0.
Yeah, right. But what they do in positive psychology is they have realized that a lot of that stuff can actually be applied in that -10 to 0 spectrum. So we can actually use a lot of positive psychology for people who are depressed. We can look into post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. So we can actually relate to death and talk about it from a positive psychology angle. So there's very interesting stuff being published since about 2012. So slowly people picking up on the science of it and realize that there's a really good integration of what, for me, clearly are existential themes. People don't talk about them as existential themes in positive psychology, but that's really what it is. So I really welcome that, because it's the first important step to taking positive psychology, which was separate from psychology as usual, as an addition. It's always meant to be integrated. So now they start to integrate it and bring it all together, so we can get to a more complete study of psychology.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think let's give Yannick another round of applause.